I have to do that again. He didn't do it right. I didn't do it right. We're on the air. Good evening. It is Wednesday, September 4th, 2024, and the City Commission meeting, our regular meeting for tonight, is called to order. And I want to say congratulations to all the students who've gone back to school today. Sorry about that, but I hope you're enjoying your first day. So would you like to do the roll call, please?
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Marl.
Here.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Here.
Mayor McGriff.
Present. So will you all please stand and join me in the flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. So thank you, commissioners. You're going to indulge me for a moment. We have a walk-on proclamation that I was reminded of this last week by our city recorder. So I'm going to go ahead and read that very quickly. So it's a proclamation declaring September 8th, 2024 as Star Trek Day. And as many of you know, we've had a Star Wars Day proclamation, and so we have equal time for the other side of the galaxy. And I was actually reminded of this not only by the recorder, but another citizen. So whereas in 1964, a freelance writer named Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek, and whereas on September 8th, 1966, the original series debuted on NBC, and whereas Star Trek followed the voyages of the Starship Enterprise, a space exploration vehicle, and whereas the mission of the Enterprise was to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, and to boldly go where no one has gone before, and whereas Star Trek has forever changed the genre of science fiction as we know it, and whereas Star Trek featured a multi-ethnic crew, and whereas Star Trek canon included the original series, 9 spin-off series, and a film franchise, whereas Gene Roddenberry was the first television writer to receive a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and whereas Star Trek is noted for its cultural influence beyond the works of science fiction, now therefore be it resolved that the City Commission of Oregon City does hereby proclaim September 8th, 2024, star date 2409.08 as Star Trek Day, and call upon all the citizens of Oregon City to join their fellow citizens across the Star Trek universe in recognizing and participating in this special observance. And as Mr. Spock would say, live long and prosper. And I will sign this today on the 4th of September, 2024. So equal time, as we stated. And I brought one of my DVDs, which I realize I've never even opened out of the box. So it's there somewhere.
It's not a DVD. That is not a DVD.
It's a video. Sorry, it's a video. I just grabbed something off the shelf. I have several things at home.
Good job, Adam.
Imagine. So it's a video, which I still have my. Yes, I still have it. I haven't used it in ages because now it's been replaced by a DVD player, and now we have streaming. So I have lots of obsolete equipment at the house. All right. So tonight, do we have any public comments, Mr. Lee?
We do not.
All right, so we'll move on to item number 5, which we do not have any presentations, I take it? Nope. So we're going to move on to item number 6, which is the adoption of the agenda. We have one item on the consent agenda. Is there anything anybody would like to say about it, or would we like to approve the one item on the consent agenda? All right, hearing.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
All right.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded by Commissioner Mitchell and seconded by Commissioner Smith that we adopt the consent agenda, which is Resolution 24-24.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Marl.
Aye.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Aye.
Mayor McGriff.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. So tonight we do have a public hearing. We are going to be having a review of the second reading of Ordinance 24-1007 for the, I'll just skip all the numbers, for the annexation that is on 14389 and 14421 Maplelane Road. So we will open the public hearing. We want to say anything staff-wise? Nope. Nope. Anything, commissioners? Okay, being that there's no testimony, there's no report, we will close the public hearing, and we will proceed to deliberate and get a motion. So anything on this at all? It's our second reading. So we need a motion. I need a motion, somebody please.
Okay, I'll move to approve the second reading of ordinance 24-1007 for GLUA 24-4, AN 24-1, annexation, and CC 24-1, zone change at 14389 and 14421 Maplelane Road.
Okay, I'll second it. Any discussion?
Ordinance number 24-1007, an ordinance approving annexation and zone change proposal number GLUA 24-4, AN 24-1, and ZC 24-1 of certain property located at 14389 and 14421 Maplelane Road to the city of Oregon City.
Okay. Would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner O'Donnell,
No.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Marl,
Aye.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Aye.
Mayor McGriff.
No. Motion passes.
Was that a yes or a no?
I said no,
Okay,
but
motion
the motion
passes.
does pass. All right, so this goes into effect 30 days, I believe, is the time frame. So 30 days, and this will allow for the removal of certain special districts, bringing them into the city, and we're moving on forward with that. All right, so item number 9 this evening is general business, and we're going to have a discussion of the Park Place Concept Plan zoning code amendments.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. So
You can knock it down there.
tonight is a specific to some of the legal issues surrounding the code changes. So we had a work session about a month ago and brought you an update as to where we were and the work the Planning Commission had done. So I don't intend to go back through that code tonight. And we don't actually have a PowerPoint for you, so we're just talking.
No.
I know.
thought it was really good
It's our
last
first meeting without Mr. Lewis, and there's no PowerPoints
You guys are
tonight.
just falling apart already. I don't know. Whole place is going through rapid ruin.
So as you remember, what we started out with at the work session was talking about kind of a new land use paradigm that we're in, different from when the Park Place Concept Plan was adopted. And Mr. Kabizman had presented a legal issues memo that we presented to the Planning Commission, and there were a number of questions that came up. And so we brought just that section of that discussion back tonight for you to ask more questions, get your questions answered, and provide more detail. And so Carrie Richter is going to go through that memo and basically just answer whatever questions you have on that.
Thank you. So I watched the work session, so I know what happened, and I wrote the memo, and I've been part of the Planning Commission's proceedings to date, so Bill and I sort of thought that it made sense for me to come and be here to answer your questions. I wasn't planning to go through all of the details in the memo again. I can dig deeper into any area you have questions, but there were a couple of just high-level topics covered in the memo. First was the constraints and opportunities for the construction of Holly Lane and Swan Avenue. Number 2 are the limitations on the city's ability to regulate housing, and there are a number of those. Clear and objective standards, the requirement to allow middle housing, the need to implement the concept plan through clear and objective standards, and a little bit about the mandatory adjustment provisions that are coming down the way. Item number 3 is the provision of parkland. 4, protecting the neighborhood commercial zone. And the last item in the memo is green on-site stormwater treatment. Without taking any more time, I just wanted to open it up to you to ask the questions that you want to talk further about. I know there were some questions about moratoria, some questions about LIDs. I know the mayor had some questions. So how would you like to proceed?
trying to go back through and look at my notes from our last discussion.
I'm not going to monopolize it, but I'll start off with a question to get things rolling. When we're talking about the timing of exactions, which are needed improvements, how does phasing a project as opposed to the consideration of the entire project impact the timing of exactions?
Exactions are evaluated at the time that the land use request is filed. So if it's a subdivision application that has multiple phases, the exaction obligation is imposed at the time of the subdivision. When the actual improvement has to be made depends on when the impacts from that subdivision necessitate that improvement. So if you had a phased development that was 10 houses, 10 houses, 10 houses, 10 houses, and you didn't trigger a failure of an intersection or trigger the requirement for a street until the 40th house, it would be the fourth phase that that improvement would have to be installed.
So are funds accumulated, to use your example, if it was $1 million exaction in the end, and the project was in 4 phases at $250,000 each, at the completion of phase 1, 1/4 of the project, would $250,000 be collected and put in escrow, or nothing would happen until the 4th phase?
It would depend on what kind of improvement we're talking about. If we're talking about the fee in lieu, for example, for the park, you would pay by the unit, and you would put $250,000 in escrow. If we're talking about a road, then the road wouldn't fail until the 40th unit. And so that's when the obligation would be due.
So if multiple projects were being built, and the first builder built the first 3, but he did not break the threshold, and then the 4th builder breaks the threshold, who pays and how much?
When we evaluate the capacity of an intersection and we know that it's going to break soon, we have folks pay as they go along. For example, 213 in Beaver Creek, we have applicants pay a proportionate share of the cost of the right turn lanes that we've identified at 213 in Beaver Creek for every development that comes along. So we collect every time. But sometimes we don't know when it's going to break. And if you're the applicant that breaks the intersection, you have to fix it in order to develop. And you can do a reimbursement district to collect from future people, but you wouldn't collect from the other development that we didn't check.
So by that explanation, the first 3 developments bear no cost of the required?
If we don't evaluate them as impacting that intersection, and we don't exact an obligation from them, then they bear no cost. It's the time that we review the application.
So this is more, you answered the legal part. For staff, are we taking any exactions as a percentage of the anticipated future need, or not? When
we review development in Park Place, we have collected a proportionate share for 213 in Beaver Creek. We have collected, I think, a proportionate share for 213 in Redland, or we have for other developments in that area. We would only collect for an unbuilt road, if you're talking about the rest of Holly Lane, for example, if we had a standard that required the rest of Holly Lane to be built. When we evaluate intersections under our current regulations, we evaluate whether the intersection level of service is satisfied. That means how many cars are moving through the intersection. That does not require 2 access points for emergency access. That is not the standard in the code right now. There is also not a standard in the code right now for how much traffic a local road can take. That is a different question than how an intersection functions. How much capacity a local road can take and how many access points you have to have for emergency evacuation purposes are not regulations in the code right now. So we are not exacting for those improvements because we have not decided that those should be regulations. What we do have in the code right now are block length standards. Block length standards ensure that every 300 feet?
500.
Every 500 feet, you have to have another road. So what that ends up doing is essentially, theoretically, giving you connectivity because every 500 feet there is another road. That doesn't help with the limited arterials and collectors that I think are the concern in Park Place.
So taking his thought a little further, so we already know that both of the intersections that you mentioned are already broken. They've been broken. And for some developments we have been able to calculate with ODOT's help some trip caps. Mm-hmm. So how does that apply, or does it apply to any future development? And I'm just talking about anything. I mean, we've got a lot of acreage in that particular concept plan area, and it seems to me that no matter what happens, it's already adding to an already broken system. So you've already said that we're taking proportional, exercising proportional, not sure what word I want to use. It's not an exaction, but we're asking them to pay their fair share of what we know to be true in that particular situation. So while I agree with what you said about we can't have standards that basically say you have to have 2 accesses, it would seem to me that in the review of a development proposal that we already know that that is a situation. It doesn't have to even be an evacuation or whatever, but we know that the way the fire codes work, that we're not looking for just one way in and one way out. So how do we make sure that it doesn't continue to be more broken, I guess is the question I have. I don't know how we do that unless we say, well, no more development.
Well, what we did with 213 and Beaver Creek was we had to adopt alternative mobility standards. Right. Remember that? Yeah. And that was where we acknowledged that the intersection was broken. Or, I mean, when I say broken, I mean it exceeded the level of service that ODOT has for movement during the AM and PM peak hours. And what we said was, well, fixing that problem will be alleviating that congestion will require a very expensive improvement. And we don't want to pay for that very expensive improvement. And so we adopted a plan that said, okay, we will accept more congestion because we don't want to pay to build ourselves out of that. And that decision was made for a number of reasons. Maybe in part, when we collect these proportionate shares from these new developments, they're like less than 1% of the traffic that goes through these intersections. And we know that 94% of the traffic going through the intersections is not Oregon City traffic.
Right.
So, I mean, would it make sense for us to pay for this very, very expensive flyover to accommodate traffic that Oregon City isn't generating? I mean, that's part of that not.
Right.
Whether or not the city could exact greater connectivity because that intersection is broken, I think the answer is maybe, but we would have to have standards that we'd have to have legislation, regulations that made that a requirement. And whether or not that regulation is something like, you generate more than 50 trips, you have to have 2 access points. You know, I mean, and we'd have to define what access points means,
right,
because we can't have people going, you know, leaving Holcomb and coming back to Holcomb. I mean, that doesn't do anything. We have to get them somewhere else. So we're gonna have to define, you have to have, those 2 access points have to be to an arterial or a collector, and that arterial and collector has to be a certain distance from the other arterial or collector, or it has to not connect back to that arterial or collector. But the problem out there is everything goes to, it kind of all feeds to one highway, and you're not gonna change that. You know, you can't get away from 213 and Beaver Creek. I mean, it all sort of, so I get your point, and I think it's possible, but it all feeds back to those 2 intersections, it seems to me.
I was trying to, in my head, figure out if we had built those, the clover leaf like was in the original plan, would that have done anything, or would it just still be full like it is today anyway?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's pure speculation, so.
Well, and Park Place is going to be Holcomb and Redland, right? Not necessarily 213 and Beaver Creek, right? So I guess what Carrie's saying.
Oh, okay, I
Right.
misunderstood where the
They have to
connection
go through
is.
that one to get, to me, they're kind of in the same.
Right. I mean, realistically, the problem we're having in Park Place, right, is that even, you know, we could, when the Holly Lane connection is made to Redland, I guess theoretically you could jump on Holly, keep going south, right, and come out on Maple, right, onto Beaver Creek that way.
Theoretically.
But realistically, you know, we're getting folks coming down Holcomb to the Redland intersection, or Redland to the Holcomb intersection, and then trying to get them onto 213 in a manner that works with the north-south traffic on 213.
Right.
That's the pinch point related to Park Place currently. Will there be some trips that continue south bypassing 213 via Holly Lane in the county? Probably. People do it today. Right? No reason to think that wouldn't continue. It's just to what extent are people going to bypass that to try to get down to Beaver Creek? So yeah, it's a you know, the couple of highways with the topography with the rivers coming together at those pitch points. And it's like, let's say you build the system big enough to make it a free flow onto 213, you know, then you hit 205.
Right, and then there's not.
Right, so it's just how far do you chase the capacity of free flow?
Well, we could go all the way to the border with Washington and still not be ahead. I mean, you mentioned the critical piece of the puzzle is that we have topographic issues there. That is 99.9% of the problem, and I have a great deal of concern about that. We already have a highway that continues to move. You know, if you hadn't been on 213 lately, there's a few new little dip-de-doos when you are on that, because stuff is settling. And I just, you know.
I don't know if Carrie, you want to talk a little bit about, so when the Park Place concept plan was adopted, we adopted the water master, sewer, and the transportation as an addendum to the transportation system plan, for example. And in that, one of the projects identified for long-term is the north-south connection from Holcomb to Redland, right? So I guess I'd have to check if we're collecting an SDC on that. It is in the TSP as an identified project.
It's SDC eligible.
Which makes it SDC eligible. So I think to getting to Commissioners O'Donnell's question about, you know, what we deal with sometimes are failures that happen and they're not in a master plan, right? You're the straw that broke the camel's back. You break it, you bought it, you fix it, right? It's a little more complicated in these intersections that fail, or these improvements that we're collecting SDC on, right? So in that case, you're probably in a situation where we're giving an SDC credit for the improvement if it's made. So we are, if it's an SDC eligible project and we're collecting an SDC for it, we are getting that incremental payment into the SDC, of which that project is one of 150 projects in there. But, you know, we are collecting that as part of the transportation SDC for every house that receives a building permit or every commercial building permit that's issued. In order to issue the permit, they have to pay their system development charge or bankrupt it. So it doesn't quite get to what you're saying in terms of if it's not a project that's on the SDC list, we're not collecting for it. And if someone breaks it, the first 39 houses get in, and the 40th one is the one who broke it, and then, you know, that's when that improvement comes due.
So how do we get proportionality then?
Well, if I could hop in for a minute. So it's not, the SDCs are paid per dwelling unit or building permit. But the improvement would have to be done before that, because if there's a subdivision, then they have to actually build out the public improvements. And that's how they get their plat. That's how they get platted. We sign that, and then they can go for their building permit. So it's not quite like, you know, this one homeowner who finally gets their dream house and has to pay for this road to go in. So it's the builder that's having to put in the public improvements. I think maybe a tangible example, not quite the same, but the golf course subdivision at the south end of town, they've proposed really just a piece of what they're going to come in with later phases, but they proposed one subdivision. They're going to build out the connection to Beaver Creek. They're going to build, or at least set aside, dedicate land for a park, probably build it eventually as part of that one piece. But the overall plan in that Thimble Creek area is for those roads to be built out and for more parks to be developed. So as the phases come in, that's when they'll have to build them out.
Ms. Richter,
Yes.
in your professional experience or the experience of your firm, maybe with other jurisdictions, have you seen a stronger codes that would allow us to address this proportionality that the mayor spoke of? You know,
Well, proportionality is always a case-by-case basis. It is always a very fact-intensive analysis. And so I've seen different ways that rough proportionality is calculated. You can calculate it by frontage, you can calculate it by trips, you can calculate it by lot area, you can calculate it many different ways. But at the end of the day, it is always going to be a one-off. And I don't think you're going to write a code to make your ability to exact things stronger than the Constitution already provides those protections.
I mean, to the example cited, almost absurd. 39 houses are built and we don't tip the scale. And number 40, guy comes in, builds one house and he's on the hook for everything.
No, because that doesn't, no. There are examples of infill housing where you've got a vacant lot and an applicant comes and wants to build that one house, and you say, you got to build all the sidewalk, right? And we've had fights with applicants over whether or not they will need that whole sidewalk, right?
Right, they only want to pay for what
They only want to pay for, you know, a portion of the sidewalk, or they don't want to pay for the sidewalk at all because the sidewalk, they argue, doesn't go anywhere. Or, so there are cases of infill lots where the 40th lot has an obligation, and we go through the, you know, back and forth about whether or not those sidewalks are roughly proportional. The cost of them, sometimes we'll reduce the size of them. Sometimes we'll say you could do curb-tight sidewalks so you don't have to do tree planting space. You know, there are ways we negotiate that to make it proportional.
Haven't we done a situation where maybe they feel it doesn't go anywhere, but we know that there's going to be connectivity, so we say, okay, you're going to bond this part of it, or you're going to pay in lieu of, and then once we connect those pieces, then the whole thing gets done. And to me, that makes, a lot more sense. What I struggled with over the years was we had development after development after development just beyond here, and we knew that, that third or fourth one was going to cause the intersection at Central Point, Leland, all that. We knew that was going to cause it to fail. But the frustration was we knew it was going to happen, but we were not able to fix it ahead of the development. And that's part of where I struggle with when we know that this is going to trigger this. It seems like we should have the opportunity to correct the problem so that things work more smoothly. And I think, we are hampered in Park Place by inheriting a bunch of substandard everything from the county, because they knew someday it was going to be in the city, so they never did anything. I mean, we have a substandard road, we have substandard roads in throughout that neighborhood. There are no sidewalks. I mean, the infrastructure was, we inherited a frickin' mess. And now we're trying to go back and, as best we can, retrofit an area that is already partially developed. And then we have the undeveloped areas, which of course we've saved the most difficult sites for last. So now they're overwhelming that particular underserved, undeveloped system that, the structure isn't there to make it work right. We're just compounding one thing after the other. And I know we can't just say, okay, stop. But we're always playing catch up on this. That's what we're doing all the time. We're always playing catch up, and we're never going to get caught up. And I think that was our frustration in working through with the Planning Commission, with the public on the concept plan, that we had an opportunity here to do things differently so that we could make it right from the get-go, rather than waiting until the situation is already exacerbated.
I guess if the expectation is that the roads will be built before the development, the way that would happen is if the city built them, right? If we, calculated it'd be like building when we finished Myers Road from high school, right, to 213, right? We went in, we acquired the properties, we built the infrastructure, right? Some of it was SDC eligible, some of it was transportation funding, right? So I'm just not aware of how, getting significant infrastructure. So like what Aquila was saying, typically what you see is your frontage is built so you can plat it,
right,
so the lots get created so you can build building permits, right? That's the incentive for the builder to get his frontage improvements done so they can start building, selling the lots. It gets more complicated when it's like, well, we want the next half mile built as well. And, it's really hard to force a 30 or 40 lot subdivision to build a full street section much more off their property, right? Because we're really focused on intersection level of standards, not necessarily, the developer's gonna say, well, I've got a connection right here and it works fine. Why you can't force me to build this. I don't need it. If you want to pay for it, city, I'll build it, but I'm not gonna build it, right?
So
I don't know if you,
but how do we, without significantly putting ourselves into a financial hole, how other than that do we get ahead of this? We built Myers Road, and I think that was an excellent example. It wasn't quite as built out. So I'm thinking of the next thing when we were probably in 2019, 2020, we were talking about things that we could do to help make Beaver Creek Road work better. And I remember one of the things that got poo-pooed was we talked about putting in some additional roundabouts. And I still think that is a viable option. But we might be too late to the table because we can't acquire some of that property unless we say, okay, so-and-so, you're developing, but we'd like you to to deed us this piece so that we can put that in at a later time. So I think that's one way. Beaver Creek has at least some I can't see us doing that on Holcomb. It's already, I don't know how we make that happen. It's just stuff is built out, but, who knows? So I guess, go ahead, Michael.
Your Myers Road example made me think of something. Okay, so situation number one, I've got an unimproved little 2-lane street, and I'm going to build there. I got to pay SDCs, and I have to do half street, and a sidewalk, and a curb, and all that.
Correct.
Example number two, I come along on Myers Road, where the city has already built out the half street and the curb and the sidewalk. Do I pay the city back for what's there, or it's a free ride?
I think
You
They
pay
pay their
SDCs.
SDCs.
They pay the SDCs, right, but they're not paying for the half street improvements that are already done.
Correct, and
Okay.
That's, where do you invest the limited tax dollars in transportation funding that we had available, right?
Right.
That's one of the discussions, not to digress too far, but, urban renewal, right? Do you invest in infrastructure? Because then it's a cost that the adjacent redeveloping property doesn't necessarily have to pay for as part of the redevelopment of blighted area. Or, building the Beaver Creek Road extension when this used to be an urban renewal area up here, or the First Street extension, right? We paid for that infrastructure, which then drove that investment in those industrial properties.
So
Unless we created a reimbursement district, right? So then it would be, okay, this costs $10 million, we're going to divide it equitably along the 20 lots that are created. When they pull a building permit, they pay their SDC and whatever their reimbursement costs would be. So that'd be setting up a local improvement district or a reimbursement district. But typically, the city hasn't set those up. We've made the public improvement. We redid Malala, we did Beaver Creek, right? Those are just public investments that we're making in the infrastructure. And yes, it benefits the adjoining property owners because potentially they don't have to upgrade the water line, the sewer line, build the sidewalk.
But that reimbursement district is something we could do, for instance, on that Holly Lane extension.
Yes, and I don't remember, I have to go back to the code.
There's two options for reimbursement. There's local improvement district, where the city makes the improvement and assesses all of the benefited property owners.
that's an LID.
And they pay a proportionate share back to the city over a period of time that we determine. Or there's reimbursement district where a developer builds the road and we, as the city, approve a reimbursement district that provides for the benefited properties to pay that applicant back over a period of time. And the difference is where the money goes in those two examples. In my view, an LID out in Holly Lane could have the effect of assessing existing property owners who will benefit as well as vacant property owners, where reimbursement district is more forward-looking on development. You see what I'm saying? So because when you think about Holly Lane, it will benefit not just new development in Park Place. It will benefit existing development too. And in a way, the city maybe ought to shoulder some of the cost of that benefit to the existing development that maybe was shortchanged an extra access. But in my mind, when you think about Myers Road and you think about these other public projects the city has done, and you look at where the legislature is right now and the pressure on the governor to come up with funds for infrastructure projects in order for housing to happen, and you look at the fact that Park Place has been in the urban growth boundary for a really long time and development hasn't happened, I think that Park Place is a prime place for some federal money to come to build Holly Lane. And, there were 3 bills in the last session that talked about grant funds and and unrolling, state money to infrastructure to build housing. And when I think about how, you know, how Oregon City could, you know, really get out in front of this, I would think it would be in Salem getting, you know, being proactive about getting money for this road.
Well, both organizations, OMA, LOC, and the county, what is it, the Association of Oregon Counties, that is something that's on their political, on their legislative agendas, is the infrastructure, because we're getting, you know, we're like a hammer, we're getting a nail, we're getting beat over the head with the hammer to do X, Y, and Z, and everybody's saying we can't do it without infrastructure improvements.
But I think that, I think that, you know, having this on the legislative agenda of LOC is good, but when you look at how, you know, Wilsonville builds Frog Pond, they do it because they have a lobbyist in Salem who is just pounding the table to get their project seen. And I don't know if Oregon City ought to be more proactive on that legislative front rather than just waiting for DLC to announce what the grants will be for this year.
So let me just clarify. So I understood what you said, and I think what I heard you say is that other than paying SDCs, we made the improvements on Myers Road because it was an investment. But I have a vacant piece of property that I own on Myers Road, and someday I'm going to develop it. So when I develop it, I'm not going to be required to pay my portion of what that improvement that would benefit me other than the SDCs.
Correct.
Correct.
But Myers Road also benefits the entire community. So those are the policy trade-offs to think about.
Well, there's a couple questions that come to mind. Maybe we should have a lobbyist. In addition, I hope we have a grant writer, because you got to get those monies. It's always a question of who benefits and who pays. And I understood what you said about, I started to think about setting the boundaries on reimbursement districts, and I understood about existing housing. They might be assessed something. But then in my mind, I equate it to a water line. If we're replacing a water line, and a 20-inch water line completely serves the existing communities, but then we have to upsize because of a future build, that's where the SDCs come in, right, for the upside. So why doesn't the same logic apply to transportation and roads?
Upsizing it?
Yeah.
It may, it just depends on how you do how you figure the assessment. It depends on if you determine that the Holly Lane extension will help other existing development or not. If it doesn't, and existing development does not need Holly Lane and won't use it, then they wouldn't pay for it.
Well, they'll use it, but they were capable of getting by with what they had. They didn't need a third lane. A third lane or the enhanced transportation simply becomes necessary because of the new development. And that's why I make that equation in my mind about water line sizing. I think it's very arguable about who shall pay and setting the boundaries of the reimbursement district.
The way reimbursement districts and LIDs are started is with a report allocating those costs to benefited properties. And you can allocate it a number of different ways, and there are professionals that do that. But the key thing you have to know first is how much it's going to cost to build. And Holly Lane is not designed. We don't exactly know where it's going to go, and we have no idea what it will cost. And so all of those sort of prefatory things have to be done first before you could start down that road.
Yeah, a lot of prep ahead of time.
I can tell, and I've said it before, I want our government to be in a proactive versus reactive position. So whatever we can do to get ahead of that. I mean, I think about incremental assessment that I need 4 more miles of road. And this development is in 4 phases, and the first phase, in my mind, should pay 25% and build the first mile of road. And then the second phase builds the second mile of road. And what that does is when the 4th one comes in, I don't have to start from scratch and build 4 miles of road and take all that time when I had 75% of it done. And that's the logic in my mind that I don't understand why we can't accomplish that.
We can accomplish that if you're talking about sequential development that goes 1 mile down the road and the second mile down the road and the third mile down the road, because that development uses that. But what you're talking about with redundant access is the first applicant has to build all 4 miles of road because they have to get to the second access point as part of that first development.
I'm not saying they have to build all 4, I'm saying they have to build the first mile.
That we can do and do and would do in Park Place.
See, because unless we can solve this, then it leads us to the next conversation on moratoriums. And whether we've imposed moratoriums for sewer capabilities in the past, and obviously transportation is critical. Is a moratorium, and that's something I know you probably want to speak to, is a moratorium feasible approach to this until we get in place the needed transportation system?
There are a couple of limitations with a moratorium. And the first one is just the practical fact that under state law, the longest you can have a moratorium is 18 months. And then after that, 18 months, and then after that, you can have a public facilities plan that you can extend the length of a moratorium for 3 years. So 3 years is your total amount that you get. And you have to have the failing public infrastructure in place and operating within 3 years.
Yeah, I read that in your initial report.
So
you have to make
it
progress.
would be, I think it would be exceedingly difficult to engineer and build Holly Lane in 3 years.
Oh, for sure. I don't think that would.
And the other thing about a moratorium is that in order to implement a moratorium, you have to find that there is a public facilities shortage, and you have to have regulations on the books that support that finding. And as we started this, I said, we don't have regulations right now that require 2 entranceways or require, the regulations we have in the books say the interchanges have to function at the LOS levels. And when development comes, we're going to find that they satisfy those LOS levels because that's, that's how we plan the transportation system. So I think it would be very difficult to make a finding that we have a shortage of road capacity based on our existing regulations today.
Are we remiss in not having those type of legislations? I mean, we've all sat here and listened to traffic engineers. Can they not give us the raw data we need?
We had a presentation from DKS, the Planning Commission, where they talked about local street capacity, not intersection capacity, but how much traffic a local street can accommodate without feeling like it's not safe for your children to play in the street. And those are regulations we don't have and we could have, and I think a few jurisdictions do have them.
They have guidelines, but our consultant didn't find any local volume standards, only guidelines that are in TSPs or kind of policy guiding documents.
So I don't know of any city that has evacuation standards of the type that are some amount of cars requires 2 access points. I believe that the way planners have gotten around that is with block standards. But that doesn't mean we couldn't have those standards. We could have those standards. We could write them in a way that is clear and objective if that was the commission's desire.
Well, that's my desire.
I know you feel very strongly about that.
Well, the young lady that was before us, given this presentation, spoke about other jurisdictions actually starting to implement evacuation standards.
Well, it is a hard fact reality given what we know today.
Well, I always take the approach is don't tell me what we can't do. Let's try to do something and see what happens. So, I mean, but it's always the will of the commission. No one of us can give direction without the consensus of the others.
I guess I would be willing to suggest that we do more than just explore that. I don't know what, trying to get my head around what the capacity, of a street is. I'm trying to look at it from this, from the layperson standpoint. I mean, we have people tell us all the time that their street is too full, or it's too this, or it's too that, and, I don't know what that means, because we have, traffic is in peaks, and, Monday, the holiday, was a classic example. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop on my street. That's how quiet it was. Tuesday was a completely different story. So there was a difference between, so if you based your capacity on Monday, can take everything. You base the capacity on Tuesday, it's a whole different story, because that's when the traffic started up again. But it seems to me, I think Frank is correct, we're trying to look into the future to try to do the best we can for our community, knowing the situation that we are facing now. And I guess, I don't know where the Planning Commission is on this, but I think we have to try, because we're trying to create clear and objective standards to try to achieve the things that our community has asked us to do. And that's really the bottom line for me, is that how do we get to where we've been asked to? It's a matter of, our community livability, and that is big. It's really big. We're already being told that our community livability is being degraded. Well, everybody always says that when they're the last one in. So let's shut the door, because now we're here, nobody else can come in. Nobody else can come in. And we've heard that, for years.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
To Commissioner O'Donnell's comments, I've been advocating for local street standards back to Planning Commission days, and I think we should have that. As a practical matter, I agree that an evacuation standard would be great, but I'm thinking about, let's just use Park Place as an example.
Make it broader.
Where's the problem? In other words, which way do I have to go? So, what if the fire is down by Holcomb and I got to go out? I know, like on the East Coast, where they're in hurricane zones and they've got reversible lanes. That's because the problem's going to be there and everybody's got to go that way. But we can't predict. I mean, when we had that level 2 that we got
Evacuation, yeah.
It took, I don't live in Park Place. I live up by the community college, but it took me 2 hours to get to 205. Probably, in retrospect, tactical error to try to go that way. But if the fire had been the other direction, now you got to go that way. So I'm with you on local street standards, and I've been pushing for that. But I just don't see how in a community that's as diverse in terms of
It's
directions and where the problem could be, how you could do an evacuation standard. I don't know.
But I think you control only that which you can control. You can't control egress out into the county, but we can control the ability to exit toward the city. So, I mean, if we could get support for street standards like you're talking about, I'd be all for it. I'll be a vote to give direction to do that.
I agree. I think we've got 3 of us that agree to that, and none of us would disagree. The issue that we have no control over is that if it was just Oregon City, we could figure out how to get people out of here.
Right.
But the problem was everybody coming from Redland and Estacada and beyond that to came through here. We don't have any way to try to divert that traffic. Like I said, if it was just us as the island, yeah, we could figure out how to get out of here.
Right.
That was the problem. It was everybody coming this way. Our town was fine, but it was, you could just see that caravan coming. It was scary.
No, I guess, is the question about Holly, because I mean, Holly Lane will get built, right? But it sounds like it's a question of timing, right? Of wanting it before, wanting the development to build off-site improvements.
Concurrent,
That
not
can,
before, concurrent.
but that are off-site and probably can't be justified.
Right, exactly.
Because they have an exit already with the standards that we currently have. So
Even though
for
we think it's substandard.
So for example, like when we talk with the legislature, right? It's historically been water for a new reservoir in Henrici, money for Redland 213 intersection, money for the slip lane onto 213 from Beaver Creek, right? So if it's a timing issue, like is Holly Lane a priority that we start lobbying for, essentially, right? When the legislature is asked, what are the projects? We have our sheet. We turn it in every year. C4, you know, is this, it's in our SDC. Are we going to, sorry, it's in our TSP. Like, is this a project, or is the expectation that it's going to be built concurrently or ahead of time and the developer is going to pay for it all? Right, because that's different, and that's more, I think, a little more difficult to do. Or do you prioritize it, right? And it becomes the thing that we're going to go ask for.
I think in order to make this work, we have to be in the front of the caravan instead of behind the caravan on this. I shudder to even think what it's going to cost, because I have some idea of the topography. I know that the right-of-way for that is not what you see on the roadway. I recall the last time we had an in-depth discussion about it at Planning Commission. You know, we got houses that are right there next to the road because they don't know where the right-of-way is, but the right-of-way is there. I know that we talked about it being a 60-foot right-of-way, but it's not built to that because of topography. So, you know, you were talking about evacuation routes, and you know, I know that 99E is quote unquote, when you go down towards Canby, that is an evacuation route, which is frightening to me that that's an evacuation route.
Yeah.
But, you know, where else do we have evacuation routes in this community? I don't, you know, that one's signed, at least I know that. But, you know, if we ever have something else happen, I mean, I just shudder to think how we're going to be able to get out of here. Because I don't think we can. I think it's going to be gridlock like it was before, but that doesn't mean that we can't, as Frank says, be proactive about it.
I mean, that's why there's a level system in place, right? Ideally, everyone's not leaving at the same time. It is an issue of direction plus, you know, what happened in that event, right? We had, trying to pick up all the county, right? And after, 5-6 hours, right, it was back to free flow. And I guess what's the expectation, right? Is that during an evacuation, you're going to be at free flow? That's, once again, you could probably get to, if you can get to 213, right, then you're hitting 205, right?
205.
How far do you chase? I get, you can try to isolate the city, but like I said, we could evacuate the city, right? It's
Everybody
picking
else.
up all of South Clack County through 3 roads.
Yeah. So can we take a look at trying to write some street standards that are clear and objective? We're not going to get there 100% for what we're talking about, but we could get part of the way, I think.
I think with the presentation, some of the policy was really around what are those measures that you put in place for traffic calming and pedestrian safety, right? Where are we going to utilize speed bumps? Where are we going to utilize curb extensions? As part of the traffic calming component of keeping a local street feeling like a local street, right? Because I think one of the most complaints we get is not necessarily volume, it's speed.
It's always speed.
Right? It's always that feeling that someone's going too fast. They're doing, 35 and a 25 or a 20, right? And do we look at those lower speed limit, the 20s instead of the 25s? Do we start thinking about that on our local streets, to really try and drive those speeds down?
What outcome do we want to see if we were to develop street standards? What's the goal? You're,
The goal
what's
of
the ultimate goal of street standards?
The goal is to prevent or mitigate the situations where something that has served as a local street becomes a pass-through for additional development further out. So all of a sudden, it's not really a local street anymore. It's, what's the next step
Like a
up?
neighborhood collector, maybe.
Yeah, right.
Or
It becomes a neighborhood
collector.
Talk
collector.
about people doing cut-throughs.
Right, right.
And that's an admirable goal and a worthy goal.
Yeah.
So do we need to give direction for the staff to pursue that? Because it sounds like we're getting concepts, but not go forth and do this, create it.
Well, we had 3 of us saying yes.
Okay, well, if that's the direction, does staff understand? 3 of us want to pursue that?
I'm sure that it's probably the other 2 are saying, yeah, that's something we should probably look into, but I'm not going to speak for them, so.
So it was my understanding, based off of the presentation that we received from our traffic engineer consultant, that that direction was already given. And so I haven't really had too much to add, simply because it was my understanding that we were already going to be doing that. I think where I am interested in hearing more about is when she was presenting to us at our last meeting, I believe, there was a very clear difference in what she was presenting between the actual traffic calming, which I think we're all in agreement we want to see, versus the enforceability of volume standards, a strict, once you reach this, then you have to do something, when she explained that we would maybe be the first to do that. And I'm not opposed to looking into being the first, but what I want to recognize is that there are lower hanging fruit that I think ought to be prioritized before we look into doing that, in the sense that I would like us to look first at getting those traffic calming standards in first, because it not only applies to Park Place, but it applies citywide, and it's something that I think is at the top, because it's just as Tony said, people are not necessarily complaining about the volume, although I think that in the coming years people will. What we hear a lot about is the speed, that people are going way too fast down my neighborhood street, and there's no way to slow that down. And so that's what I would prefer if we're going sequentially. And again, I'm not opposed to looking at ways that we can be a trailblazer, I guess, in the field of those strict volume standards. I just think I would expect some pushback at higher levels because of how intense the push is for housing development, and how that could be construed as getting in the way of that.
I think you're correct, but I think you look at streets like Lynn Avenue. That is somebody's local street, even though it's not classified as that. So I think those types of streets need to have some calming situations as well. I would like to see people drive down McLoughlin Boulevard and not think of it when you hit our city limits that it's 90-90 and it's the raceway. It needs to also have some traffic calming so that when people are coming through there, they know that it is a different place. This is, once they get out of Kenema, they can speed to their heart's content, if they don't get caught. But I mean, how do we make the streets in our town, regardless of their classification, except for some of the arterials, where we do have people living on them, Lynn Avenue, Washington Street, 9th Street, 5th, we've got people, as you say, and you've adequately identified that, they'll come down and you see them going down 9th Street or 8th Street, even though there are stop signs, and they're just rolling down that hill because there isn't any hardly any traffic. So they're using it as a bypass, which then in turn causes problems in the neighborhood. And again, driving up here tonight, I decided to just keep my accelerator on 30, see what was going on. And I had a line of cars behind me. But we've reduced the speed from 35 to 30, I believe, but still, it's like, that is somebody else's local street.
Well, from the last meeting where Rhea presented the local street volume memo, the direction that I had, that I've started to work with Dana on, is to first just interview those other peer cities to find out how it's actually working, and then to look at how we can strengthen the existing traffic calming measures we already have. And that's something that the TAC looks at every year, and so we would kind of weave those two things together and then decide from there where can those traffic calming measures have a bigger impact. Do we try to get them into TIAs? Do we put them into our street standards? Where else can some of those standards live? So that's where we were going to start from.
That sounds good.
Okay, I wanted to check that.
So you're saying both approaches are going to go forth concurrently, simultaneously? We're going to go forth and pursue traffic calming, and we're going to pursue, what was it, volume standards? Is that?
Street standards.
Street, is that?
That was not what I was saying. That's why I wanted to clarify.
Well, I do too, because I don't want to sit here and say, well, it's my understanding. It either is or it is not. Are we doing both of those? Are we doing one of them? What's the will of this commission? I struggle with the fact that I can only accomplish one task. I'll leave it up to the rest of the commission.
I think we have to pursue both. I feel.
Well, if we're going to do it, let's give clear direction so that it's not, I understood this or I thought that.
So when you,
I would like to see us pursue both. I think they'll probably develop at two different paces, because the one is the traffic calming is simpler, but if we're kind of blazing new trail on a hard cap kind of a standard, that's gonna take more time. But
so
it's worth pursuing.
let's say the local street standard is 500 trips per day going one way. Okay, so the 501st trip, are we going to deny that application and say you have to find a different route and we're not going to allow you access to this local street?
Well, if you had the rule on the books, you could potentially do that.
But I'm asking, is that the outcome that we're trying to get to?
Well, it's kind of the same way if you think about the number of cars that a street can handle compared to what's the capacity of the sewer pipe that's under the street.
Indeed.
And if you hit number 501 on the sewer and it'll only handle 500, you deny.
Right, but I don't necessarily think it's an arbitrary number on the trips. The capacity of a pipe is only X. That's why traffic is focused on intersections, because you can look at a delay versus the speed and the capacity. Like I said, we hear about speed way more often than we hear that there's too many cars, right? We hear there's too many cars backing up on 99E during rush hour, right? And is it when we look at an intersection, it's the peak hour, right? Because right now, we have more capacity than we'll ever use throughout our whole city at this time of day, right? So it's really trying to manage that AM and that PM peak hour, right? That's traditionally how we've looked at it. And, and in that case, when an intersection fails, there is typically an improvement that can be made to improve the capacity of the intersection. Okay, so there's a left turn lane can be made, the timing of the signals can be changed, the queue length can be made longer. So I guess I'm just, a hard and fast, we've built a local street, it's stubbed to a property next to it that's going to be built in the UGB, but they're going to add a trip because some neighbors moved in and they have 6 cars that are being counted. So now they're at 501, so they have to find a different route around the local street that we want them to connect to, so we have connectivity on block lengths. I'm not trying to be antagonistic. I'm just trying to get to what we're going to try to accomplish by a hard number.
And that's where we're going to get the challenges for
that
developers.
automatically kicks in, traffic calming, or is it truly like you got to find a different route around, right? And I'm sorry, I cut you off there.
Well, I was just going to say that's where we're going to run into the challenges about the proportionality, which is constitutionally mandated, and we are absolutely going to be challenged on that if we were to set those numbers, which is why, based off of what I said, my understanding was, which was confirmed by Aquila, is that they are moving forward with the traffic calming, which, as I said, I think is the easiest way for us to get moving forward on this, not just for that part of Park Place in our city, but citywide. And that when it comes to having a fuller conversation about the strict caps on these trips, which I don't think there was consensus upon, I'd still like us to look and see what that could look like. And I think I'm saying the same thing that Commissioner O'Donnell and Mitchell are saying, just with more of an emphasis on the understanding that it's going to be challenging for us in this environment with the legislature as it is, with the chief executive of our state, the way having the goals that she has for housing. That's the caveat that I'm putting on my support for looking into this and seeing how it would work out and how we could actually enforce that. Because again, if we have this rule in place but we can't enforce it, then there's no reason for us to go down that road.
Well, and that's partially why we want to talk to those peer cities that were in this study to find out how they are using, because they have numbers. They're not adopted as code, they're adopted as policies, so that's different. But we are trying to find out, how do they actually use those numbers? Are they using them to discourage development? Or are they using them to encourage developers to build more routes or add more traffic calming? Like, how are they using those numbers? So I think it will be instructive to learn that and understand that.
Because I've seen examples of, I don't think they're enforceable necessarily, but it's more like, it's probably a policy of, local trips only, neighborhood street, right? Trying to, especially like, you'll see it coming out of like a business district, right? Trying to force you back to, a Lynn or a 99E rather than, because it's on a grid system, cutting through the neighborhoods. I'd have to check to see if they actually write a ticket on it. I don't know if they do or not. I think it's more of, hey, you're coming from a business district into a residential area, please use the neighborhood collector or the collector rather than the local street, right? I've seen that. I guess, yeah, but like Aquila said, we're happy to look into it. I think I was just trying to get to, maybe ahead of the discussion a little bit, but what are we trying to get to? Is it to be used as a clear and objective subdivision or commercial development standard? Or is it more of, we're going to do everything we can to reduce speeds on our local streets? And I think those two are a little bit different.
To me, every one of those elements is interrelated, whether it be volume or failed intersections or calming. I mean, intersections fail because volume is too high. So, okay, it manifests itself at the intersection, but the problem begins with the volume. So I don't see why you can't back up from the intersection and try to control volume, because one is the result of the other. I mean, we've seen it. I want to pursue it. Even if you start by investigating what other outcomes are in other jurisdictions, that would be a start.
I think they've started on that.
Yeah.
Well,
And
It was already
they
directed, yeah.
plan to start on that.
Yeah, it was already directed.
Yeah. I'll just say with the intersections, I mean, yes, the volume is going to contribute to the intersection failing. Typically, what happens is, rather than denying something, they have to mitigate it. They have to either widen it, add a left turn lane, add a right turn only. There's some mitigating factor to that increased volume. And so that, I guess if I were to take the same approach to the volume on the street, that mitigating factor may be the traffic calming, that, maybe it forces people to take different routes. But, but we do have that direction, so we'll continue to work
Well,
on
and
that.
again, mitigating standards may be limited. Mitigating options, I mean, you can only do so much because of topography or whatever. So I think we beat it to death. I'm going to stand down for a bit.
I guess one of the questions that takes me to a larger road section. So we've been told that if we add a third lane on I-205, it's just going to increase the volume of traffic. And my thought about that is that it's not going to increase the volume of traffic. It's going to spread out the traffic that's already there. It's not like we're adding more traffic to make a third lane on 205. So in our local streets, and not our local streets, but all of our streets, we do have some issues where there's going to be additional volume because it's not the new development is just taking from one part of the city and moving it over here. It's other factors are coming into that. So we have two things where we have increase in volume because there's going to be new people coming in who are not here already. And we also have to look at the fact of the capacity of that particular roadway system. So it's kind of all of the above. It's not just one thing versus the other thing. But I guess the other part is, so to get off the traffic part, so when we had our last work session, not only about Park Place, you had the memo that you and Pete were discussing about some concepts, and was there any, I don't know if you took any of that back to the Planning Commission. Was there any pushback from the Planning Commission on our suggestions about the residential design? Because you went through the overview of the revisions, and some we said yes, and others we said change this, or we'd like to, amend that. We don't really want this to be there, but we want that. So we're okay with that. We're moving forward with.
So we have not gone back to the Planning Commission.
Okay. It's okay if you don't. I mean, I'm just saying.
We kind of have to for
well,
the
I know they do, but I mean,
piece. But when we go back with the code amendments, we'll incorporate what we heard from you at the work session.
Then we're good. Okay.
So these SDC collections, they reside in an account. They may not be used immediately. I think about my neighborhood, behind Chapin Park and South End Road, and all that development that happened there. There's never been an improvement done to that road. Was it not deemed necessary?
I don't think we own that part of South End, do we?
Oh, I think we own. Is it South End?
South End and
There's still parts of
Chapin.
South End that are still counted.
Central Point, excuse me, Central Point.
Central Point. Okay, yeah, South End we don't.
I mean, so despite the fact we collected all those SDCs, Central Point was never improved. It was not deemed necessary. It's still functioning just fine.
I guess I'd have,
I'm thinking we don't have to
I
answer
guess
that
I'd have to
tonight.
go back and look at the previous transportation system plans and what they had in for Central Point Road. I would imagine maybe sidewalks, right? Because once,
There were some, we could not make exactions on on Central Point Road with all those developments that went on there because again, they argued, well, we're not adding, capacity. Well, we know they were. So, but we couldn't get those improvements as part of, because each subdivision was looked at in its own little box and not cumulatively like we had asked. We said, we've got to look at these, all of them. It's not just this one and this one and this one. It's, like you said, do we get to 499 and 500 is the one that breaks the bank?
and I think one of the struggles we've had on some of those older roads that had been parcelized beforehand. So you've got, a lot of houses that are in quarter acre, half acre, one house pre-existing, right? And then you have someone puts together a 30-lot subdivision, right? And then you've got 4 or 5 houses in a row again, right? And so it's like we'd have to go in, acquire the right exact property from them in order to get a wide enough street, because essentially we took over the old county roads that don't meet city standards on rights of way. So I would imagine that's probably part of it, was that the money was utilized on larger intersection projects, because those are where we have the capacity issues. Not saying that money shouldn't have been spent and prioritized for sidewalks, but they weren't on Central Point in some places. It's been a rely on the developer as they come in, they do their frontage, and then we kind of try to piecemeal it historically. Once again, though, I mean, those are older, those are probably late 90s, probably.
Yeah. It's Westling Farms, it's all of those developments that are beyond Gaffney that we were able to look at them individually, because I know the planning commission at the time wanted to say, well, you're doing this, so you need to improve Central Point. And they were like, no, we don't. We're not causing this problem. Well, cumulatively, yes, they all caused the problem.
So history will repeat itself in Park Place.
Again, we're inheriting bad infrastructure again that we can't make improvements to because they're saying, well, we didn't, you know.
But you are seeing pride, right? We were able to do the Holcomb sidewalks. We, we're doing the sidewalks up by the school, so that required property acquisition, funding to put that together. I think a little bit of the difference with the Park Place concept plan areas that you actually have not nearly as much small parcelization. You have some on Livesey, but you have quite a bit of larger lots in there. Same in Thimble Creek. The majority of those are larger lots, where when a development comes in, they're going to be building the street to the full capacity. You're not going to run into this parcelization that we see in a majority of existing Park Place up there. There's a lot of old, smaller lots in there that were built to a county standard, which was 20 feet of pavement and a ditch.
Maybe.
Yeah, so those are the hard ones that really require a city project to come in and complete in most cases.
Can I ask a question about, so at the last Metropolitan Mayor's meeting, I was informed by the City of Lake Oswego that they're applying for an exemption process under SB 1573. Do we have the ability to do something like that?
Yes.
So that just for you guys, it's the...
We haven't put together the application for it because we were waiting for DLCD to tell us what the application needed to say. I know that Lake Oswego was way out in front of it, and I heard in the work session you mentioned that, and I think it's incumbent on us to reach out to Evan Boone at the City of Lake Oswego to get on that train.
Okay, yeah, I just think that if we can apply for, this is and Adam, thank you for bringing that up last time. This is it would allow for an exemption process for local governments to avoid granting adjustments. And I think we should try to get there as quickly as we can and steal whatever we can from our neighbors.
So has that direction been given to staff? Did I miss it, or we got to do it tonight? Are we giving staff direction to pursue that exemption?
Yeah, oh, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. So I think the only other thing that besides what you brought up, Frank, thank you, is making sure that we can protect the neighborhood commercial zone. I guess my other comment from last time was, it seems like in order for us to protect that or make sure that might happen, it's going to be left to, I don't know if I want to use the word the end, but it's going to be left to a later date. And how do we go about protecting that in a way that we can help make that happen? I mean, is that something that we would need to, as a city, to provide some assistance to help make that happen? I mean, I think it's a good idea. I also don't want it to turn into like a little, well, sorry, Beaverton strip centers that are everywhere, but places like Steve's Market provide an option for people. I mean, if you run out of eggs, are you going to run all the way to Gladstone, which is the closest store, or up to the Hilltop? Steve probably has eggs at maybe a little higher price, so it allows people to make those short trips without having to go all the way to a larger area where there's, shopping and there's not a food desert. So I think, if we're really serious about making sure we want to have that neighborhood commercial area, then it really needs to be a neighborhood commercial area that's neighborhood commercial serving, and I don't know how we do that. I don't know how we make that happen or help make it happen.
Well, it appears to me that the memo is asking for a specific direction from this commission. Is that correct? Even down to establishing metes and bounds.
No, I don't think so much. We know where the meets
Where
and bounds
generally
of the
should go.
neighborhood commercial district are. I think that the question is, if you have residential in the neighborhood commercial, it increases the activity in the neighborhood commercial that makes commercial more viable. If you don't, then it's a sort of one-trick pony. It's gonna be commercial or it's gonna be vacant, and that's not as
Desirable.
lucrative,
Yeah.
right? So there's some incentive to allow some mixed use to try to increase the likelihood that you're gonna get neighborhood commercial. The problem with that, though, is that then you allow residential above and commercial on the ground floor, and maybe that those spaces are vacant for a long time.
Well,
You know, or, you know, so
But
there's.
you're protecting them.
But you're protecting them. I mean, the thing I think that resonated with me when the planning commission talked about this was, if you don't protect this land for commercial, you won't ever get commercial.
Oh, I agree.
And
Right.
so whether it is, you know, prohibiting residential except for on the second floor, or limiting it to no more than 50% commercial, I mean, residential, how you know, it's that you gotta leave the biggest piece of pie for the commercial. And how you do that is a policy question that's above my pay grade.
Well, I think we do have to say that if we really want it, then we need to protect it. But the question I also have is it really in, I know we had the concept plan, but my thought about that was, is it really in the right place? And the reason I am asking that question now is because I'm thinking of the concept plan, and you've got all this, and it's down here. So that means that anybody that might want to use it that's in the existing neighborhood to the, is that north, Tony, north of? They gotta go, I mean, seems to me it should be in between those two neighborhoods, so that people who are already there could use it, and people who are coming, who are south of that can use it. Having it at the very bottom of the Y in Park Place is, I don't see how that is
Is it
helpful.
really at the bottom? I think it's kind of in the middle.
Well, it kind of was, it was kind of more towards the bottom of that. I mean,
It's in the middle of the
It's in the
concept.
middle.
In the middle of
well, it's in the middle of the concept plan, but when you
area.
look at it, I'm looking at the concept plan.
Remember, this goes, I mean, it's kind of halfway between the south side of Winston and the north side of Redland.
I know.
Right.
I kept thinking,
Right.
maybe it needs to be closer to, what is it,
That ship
Trail
sailed
of
a
View,
little.
where you've already got a built-in.
Well, we'd need to redo the plan.
Well, I know, I'm just saying, it came to me when I was down there the other day, about a month ago, I thought, okay, if I'm gonna use this neighborhood commercial center and I live on Oak Tree Terrace, I gotta go,
Right, that was one of the, one planning commissioner had suggested that it move. That's comp plan change and a zone change, because where the neighborhood commercial is right now on Liv C, it is actually zoned that. I mean,
Yeah,
the rest of
I
it
do
is
that.
still in, you know, concept, higher level concept area, so,
it'll get built in a blue moon.
But another thing that, you know, if having a grocery store in the neighborhood commercial is really fundamental to the success of Park Place in the commission's mind, then you help build a grocery store. You know, you build a library, you build a pocket library. You know, the city that builds a civic something.
Yeah, Greg would
That
love
is you know, that helps get the ball rolling. I mean,
Yeah.
that is, you know, you either regulate it or you incentive, you know, you build it.
Well, I agree.
And
I
both,
think-
and you can do both, but I just wanted to throw out the, you know, funding part of it.
Yeah, I'm
Which shouldn't be overlooked, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm looking at the 2022 aerial, and I'm looking at the square, and it's, because I can see Holcomb, I can see the development, I see the greenways that are there, where there's lots of trees, and I know that the stream is there. So, like I said, we need to protect it, and we also need to incentivize it. So I said, yeah, Greg would think that's a great idea to have a pocket library there. So, I think we don't want it to go away.
When you say protected,
Protecting the fact that we don't want it to be completely residential. I think what you're suggesting is that we put some sort of number on it. Do we want 50% of it can't be residential, or do we only, I mean, I would prefer only residential on the upper floors.
well, and that is the case. That's the proposed code, is that there's ground floor residential is allowed if it is 100 feet back from Livesey or whatever that main road's going to be. And at the bottom floor, the ground floor has to be commercial. We did change, well, the proposal is to change it from 50% to 75% allowed for residential, because the thought was if a building can go up to 3 stories and you only allow 50%, then how...
Up to 3 stories?
Right, if you have 3 stories, how do you kind of split that up? So the thought was, if you have, a third commercial and then the rest residential above,
I think
it would still be protected.
A good example would be like Belmont Dairy. You've got commercial on the ground floor, and above it, I don't remember how many stories Belmont Dairy is, but let's say it's 3 stories. Above it is residential.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. So that's still in there.
Instead of a percentage, to me, instead of a percentage, no ground floor residential is the cleaner way to get to it.
Well, I agree, because people are going to debate, well, this is 75%, but we're not including that,
right.
and then it's...
Right, so,
Yeah.
and I guess I don't understand why the back 100 feet. To me,
Would the residential be behind the commercial part?
Right, so that you would have horizontal, not just vertical mixed use, but horizontal mixed use as well.
But if you have some sort of commercial use, you're going to want to have, maybe you're going to have loading from the back. I mean, I wouldn't want to have my house back there.
yeah.
I mean, you've got to think about how they're getting goods and services. They're not supposed to be parking right in front of the door and unloading whatever it is they're unloading. They would come around the back.
Sure, yeah, that, I could see the developer trying to wrestle with that, for sure. But, so that's the proposal right now.
Not using a percentage, that doesn't help.
I've just got a couple of what I think are pretty simple questions for Ms. Richter from the memo. The first one, I guess this might be for Mr. Conkle, really. So if I understood the memo, the only way that we're going to have the opportunity to go for federal or state funds for the Holly Lane extension is if it's in the county's TSP, right?
It will need to be in the TSP where you want the money, and you're gonna want it for land, I mean, unless you're gonna annex all that land, and then we'll use the city's TSP.
I don't think we want all that land.
Could we annex where the road is gonna go?
You could annex the
Theoretically,
lots,
yes.
You mean like make a cherry stem?
The question I'm asking really is,
I don't like
do we have a process, and the county's going to be doing their TSP pretty soon. Have we got our oar in the water to make sure we get input?
We've brought up Holly Lane, because you're connecting in, because they're going to be doing some work on the bridge right there at the existing intersection of Redland and Holly. So our discussions with the county has been, we need to start, we've got this road in our TSP. This needs to be part of the county's TSP, but I don't think they're starting it for a little bit still.
I haven't heard that they're starting it, yeah.
Can you find out,
So
Trustee, for what their schedule, their quote-unquote tentative schedule is?
Sure.
Or,
But it's the consensus of this group that we want to try to get it on the county's TSP, right?
Yes.
I'm going to say,
Okay.
I'm saying reluctantly yes, because I had to sit through a whole bunch of meetings when the entirety of Holly Lane came in, and, this has been going on for 20 years.
Well, it's unfortunate that existing Holly Lane I don't think it's on the county's TSP for improvements.
Yeah, it's not on the county's.
It's a county
for
road.
anything. They like it like that. They want it to be there. Yeah.
As I'm looking, I guess the only other question I had, the 4 acres per 1,000 people that was mentioned on park space, is that just because, is that right from the Thimble Creek plan, or is that is that a citywide requirement?
Right, that's a standard that's come out of our Parks Master Plan.
Okay. So it doesn't apply just to concept plan areas, it applies citywide?
Okay.
Right.
Cool.
Do we have a consensus that we don't want to use a percentage for the commercial
Yes.
versus residential? Just say it's going to be
Yes.
here and not there?
Yes.
I think it's, to me, that's clearer and more objective than saying it's a percentage because, well, I'm not going to count the storage room because that's not livable space. So that's, where's your percentage? What are we basing the percentage on? It's not a flat square footage. So we've got a consensus on that.
We're actually dabbling on an element of Ms. Richter's memo, which talks about the city, would they like to constrain, I don't know.
8. I see you're on 8. Yeah.
Would the city like to constrain the permitted uses within the Park Place concept plan commercial area? But that's a policy question, but there's no legal limitation to doing so. That's something to consider. Do we want to constrain those uses? We talked about what kind of businesses you even wanted there. I think we were leaning more towards service industries and medical and dental and things like that. I don't know how you specify that, but.
Well, because in our retail, it's open, so I would not be supportive of having any sin tax uses there. Let's be just generic.
Well, that puts an additional burden on our roads because you have to drive to those places.
But do you want them in your neighborhood,
No, you do not.
Yeah, so.
I think one of the proposals was to take out storm ponds and parks, wasn't it, from neighborhood commercial?
To limit them,
To limit
storm
those.
ponds and parks,
Right.
right, yeah.
We might get a lingerie store or something, I don't,
Have you seen constraints in other jurisdictions that you could enumerate, or is it just something we'll have to come up with?
Well, you don't have a clear and objective problem. You can't say no to a particular
type.
I mean, you can regulate service uses, retail uses, drive-in uses, those, you can regulate categories like that, but you can't prohibit a particular store type or named store or, So we have to talk about categories of uses, not a particular.
So how do we go about that? Because I think one of the issues that we're struggling with right now is in our downtown district, because retail is so broad, there is continued concern about certain types of uses there. And I hate to go back to the good old days or the good bad days when we listed everything out, and I know there was things we couldn't think of, but it made it so easy to say, gee, I'm sorry, your blah, blah, blah is not on this list. And then they could come in and try to prove it was similar to whatever it was. But if it wasn't specifically listed, it was prohibited. And, if we wanted to say, no stores that sell soda pop, we could put that in there, that says no stores. And I'm using soda pop as a metaphor for something else. We could say that. But we can't now. I mean, it's classified as retail. And it seems to me that in certain districts that we have, that we should be able to say, this is appropriate based on what our community tells us, and this is not appropriate. And it can go here or it can go there. Not excluded, but say it's allowed in this zone, but maybe not over here.
Maybe the thing to do would be to look at other neighborhood commercial codes to see how they regulate categories of uses, because I don't think we could say you don't want to, you can't sell soda pop. I don't think that, I think that we're talking about, you want small footprint, you want more independent types of businesses. You'd rather have a, neighborhood-run coffee shop rather than a
Starbucks
chain.
Can you restrict the placement of government or private social or health services within that area, like mental health, county mental health?
You could have a medical district. Bend has a medical district where there's just, if you're not medical, you can't go there. I mean, so you could just,
The opposite.
So can you do?
well, I know, but could you do the opposite?
Can you do the
Yes.
inverse?
Yes.
Okay. I asked that question for a reason.
But it would be all medical, right?
Pardon me?
I think it would probably be all medical.
It would be all medical.
Right,
Medical offices,
medical offices,
so anything that falls within that, yeah.
so private and public. I don't know if we could get as granular as publicly run.
No, I probably not, but we could look into it and provide you some more input on that idea. And I think that I hope that what you're thinking about is what is gonna lead to the greatest amount of diversity and independence and variety and, so I think we just need to look into it a little bit
So
more.
I guess what you're saying too is that when I think of neighborhood commercial, I think of neighborhood commercial type things that serve that particular area. So not that there would be let's say it's a laundromat. Let's say it's a dry cleaner or a shoe repair or a coffee shop or even if a concierge place where you drop your laundry off and they take it somewhere else and they bring it back and you go pick it up. Things that you wouldn't have to make an extra trip for because it's already there. I know that, we had that one little green grocer that was trying to fill a little niche, and Spicer Brothers kind of filled a niche. It was neighborhood serving, but a lot of people found out about it and went to it because it was like, oh, okay, that kind of works. So in looking at the neighborhood commercial zone, it's again, it's not trying to be a Trader Joe's. That's not a neighborhood commercial sort of use. But there are other things that could be if we could get that to come in. And again, I loved your idea of, a little niche library. Well, could be serving that particular area. Plus you've got a school in the vicinity. And so that's kind of where, my brain is going in terms of how we protect, and we also have to support it and incentivize it, I think, by having something there that we can put down a footprint. Because I think that will be a catalyst for other things.
My goal was to make a commercial district an attractive place to go to and visit, and to restrict the placement of any business, public or private entity, that would make it less attractive and people would avoid the area because of what they would encounter within that area.
Yeah, I would agree.
I don't know how you do that, but if you can, I'd like to do it.
Go ahead.
So just a quick question about timeline, because I think it's great that, I really appreciate that we were able to bring this back, because I know at the last time we were talking about it, it was kind of getting later, but in the end, tonight we ended up spending, 30 minutes confirming what I already said was my understanding of what we already gave direction for at the last meeting. And so the clock is ticking, and I'm glad that you guys are trying to go through this with a fine-tooth comb, but at the same time, the clock is ticking, and I would really like to know when things are scheduled to go before Planning Commission, and then hopefully up to us for final approval, so we can get this done as soon as possible.
They had a little schedule in here. I think it was summer, fall.
So we have a our first legislative hearing scheduled before the Planning Commission later this month, September 23rd. So ideally, we would be back here, I think the second meeting in October for a first reading, and then a second reading the following meeting after that. That's assuming we only need one meeting to get through it. I am glad that you brought up timing, because we had not put in any of the traffic calming piece into any of the code work that we did. So I don't know if you were expecting to see that with the code changes. I think that would, at this point, it would have to come later, unless if you want to see with the code changes, then we would end up pushing everything back a bit, because we don't have anything prepared for that.
Can we leave space for it, so we're not having to reinvent the wheel?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by leave space, but I think we could go forward with the code proposals that we have and still come back with the traffic calming as just a second legislative action.
If the traffic calming is citywide, it'll have to be done as a separate legislative file anyway.
Yeah.
Correct, right.
Yeah, we're thinking that yes, it applies directly to Park Place, but we're also looking at it from a citywide standpoint. Again, all streets are somebody's local street.
Right. Okay, so so that's confirmed. You'll see that separately, because that'll be a citywide thing, and then
But we leave space for it within in the document somewhere that's gonna be coming. I don't know how we do that, but it's footnoted or,
I think if we're gonna do it citywide, it would probably,
It'll be in a
It
different
would just be in a
chapter.
different chapter.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, we're amending about 7 different chapters as it is, so
I know.
it'll come back into one of those
Trying to get down to
chapters.
several,
And be
not so
applicable, but, so yeah, that's our intention. We're moving forward, our notices have gone out, our Measure 56 notices have gone out, so it's, we spent all of our summer working on it, so it's moving.
And I just want to commend you and your department and also Ms. Richter for the urgency that has been placed on this. I think the reason why I say that isn't because I don't believe that's already happening, but because I think we sometimes get to a point as elected officials where we keep wanting to discuss things to the finest grain, which is good and important, but at the same time, we need to get things done and move quickly on this. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
You have more?
No.
Okay. So to make sure you wouldn't leave any of your stones unturned. And we answered all the questions, because that's why we're back. Apparently, some of us were clear, but it wasn't quite clear enough, so we made it clear. All right, we are on to communications,
I have nothing tonight,
the
thank you.
dynamic duo.
We're good. No updates tonight.
I already told him I was calling on him tonight, and he said, "Don't you dare," so sorry. So, and I just want to move on to the commissioners. So you said C4 is coming up?
Yes, tomorrow.
All right, sounds exciting. And I understand we still heard nothing about our September 26th meeting with anybody involving the legislative committee. I've seen some emails
right.
flying back from between the mayor of Milwaukee and the mayor of Lake Oswego, and it was very vague. That's all I know about it, unfortunately. And I've checked with sources in Happy Valley and asked them if they know where the meeting's going to occur. It's not going to be at their facility, for sure. We know that. So we speculate it's one of the 2 high schools.
They ran into some trouble across the state because they chose certain cities and advertised a date without first looking into availability of facilities.
You're kidding. No. How could that
So
happen?
my assumption is that we will hear pretty late on when and where
The day
it will
before.
be specifically.
The day before.
There's something about that on the C4 agenda, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, let us know what you know. So I figured if our Mark Meek doesn't know and Nessa doesn't know, and that made me really nervous, because if they don't know, nobody knows. Mike?
Just real quickly, the Metro UGB process, the Metro Chief Operating Officer is recommending that the Metro Council expand the UGB, adding the Sherwood West area, and that would be the only addition to the UGB, and that's something that the city of Sherwood put forward and wants to have happen. And it goes to MPAC next, I think, and
Yeah, but I
then
think we have a meeting on September the 11th at like 5 o'clock or something by Zoom.
Yeah.
As much as I adore Tim Rosner, I am really have heartburn about that UGB expansion.
yeah. Well, anyway, so that's the only expansion that the Chief Operating Officer is recommending.
So I don't know if there have been any late-breaking updates on this since I initially brought it up at our goal-setting retreat, or goal updates retreat, but I was wondering if staff had any updates about the PGE roundabout situation and I think the pretty emphatic response from this commission that we do not want to be on the hook for paying for their screw-ups.
Yeah, so, you know, we've invested some time and money prior to that meeting, really trying to figure out what we believe would be the best improvement to address the situation, and we think we've identified that. So right now, we're in the process of discussing how much each party pays with the direction that the commission and what we understood, that, you know, this is really the responsibility of PGE to a significant share of that improvement. So at this point, we're going to have to get in the room and have discussions about payment. We think we've got a design that works, and so we just need to sit down with PGE and have that discussion.
Obviously, I think the staff time is understandable and the time in negotiation, but I think when it comes to a significant investment from the city, I have a really hard time with that. What is the alternative if nothing is built? Would they just, I mean, has that been identified? What would happen if it just isn't built?
Do they have another route?
Do they have another route? Do they go somewhere else?
There is no other route.
You know, I think we'd have, I'd want to get it from them exactly what would happen. I don't know that there's another route, because to get to that site, there's really one feasible way off of the expressway. You know, would they take it to another facility? I don't know. I think it's needed in our community,
Yeah.
you know, in our area. So I'm not sure how they would address
Just
that.
once or twice a year is my understanding. So it's not like they're doing this every week or every day. They're only moving that equipment maximum a couple of times a year.
Which is why it's even more ridiculous that they would think that we would want to make the investment on our end for something that only happens 1 to 2 times a year.
Nobody disagrees with that.
Well, aren't they expanding their facility at Red Soils?
You're talking about Warren and Milne?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're supposed to be.
But that doesn't change, because I said that exact same thing, like before we go down this road, are they actually moving those poles to Warner Milne? They're not. That site that they have for those big poles will still exist.
County.
Okay.
Well, we've made it clear on at least 2 occasions at the last budgetary get-together and tonight that we feel that when PG was given the ability to provide input and state what their needs were given proper notice, and they failed to do so, the error resides with them, and fixing the error resides with them. I don't see it as a negotiation.
What are they going to do? Turn off our electricity?
No, they're not.
Yeah, they messed up. Rocky.
Couple event announcements. Oregon City Pride Festival Saturday at Clackamas Community College, 12 to 5. October 4th is Homecoming Parade.
Look out. Run for your life.
Look out. And October 5th, that same weekend, the Oregon City School District is having a celebration for the 150th anniversary of the school district, so, at the high school.
Do they want need anything from the city?
I don't know.
Is that coming out of their public affairs, communications department? Well, we're meeting with them soon, so we can ask them.
I don't know what they
You
all
add
have
that to the
planned
list?
that day yet, but.
With the school district, 150th anniversary celebration. And then we've got one coming up on the 21st, the 100th anniversary of
the church? Yeah.
Atkinson Memorial Congregational Church. Did I get all the names? The
Not all
historic
of them.
name, the historic name, not the one that it
The
is
big
now.
pink church.
Yeah. So that's coming up.
And September 11th,
Yes.
remembrance on the Arch Bridge
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, we're throwing an environmentally sound piece of greenery off the bridge. Roy and I are throwing it off the bridge.
Downstream.
Downstream, yes. Oh, Frank,
Good.
you went to the Locks meeting?
I did. Well, I did go to the Locks meeting and spoke at it along with a multitude of others, including private parties and other entities, and our good mayor sits on that group. And when I got up to speak, she gave me this sign. But what we were emphasizing is the interrelationship of the locks and what Oregon City has to offer in terms of the John Storm dock. Because in some future, we're promoting commercial traffic up and down the river, upstream and downstream. And the mechanics of that are, at some point, vessels are going to have to stand off while other vessels pass through. And that locks represents the passage, but the ability to stand off without standing in the middle of the channel can be accommodated by the John Storm dock. And then the benefits of commercial tourism traffic was touched upon. But the discussion was mainly about the locks, and my input was on the interrelationship of the locks and the John Storm dock. Because, you know, when you talk about things in economics like fish and chips, things go better together. Things are more saleable together. Things are more successful together. And combining those two assets will yield success for both of them. That was the essence of it.
Well, the purpose of the communications at the Locks Authority meeting was to talk to commercial and industrial river users and how they could benefit from helping us through the process. And obviously the thing that the chair explained was that we've got to, number one, get the rest of the funding from the Corps. Number two, we've got to finish the agreement, which we're working very hard on. Number four, we have to get an operator to operate the locks, because once the authority gets the locks, it doesn't mean it's going to open, because somebody's got to operate it. So that's a whole nother process that is running concurrently with everything else. So we did hear from some commercial and industrial users, which was really good, and I was glad that Wilsonville Concrete was there, because they are a primary industrial user that's been financially burdened by the locks being closed. So, other than that, I just wanted to give the group a heads up. We're going to be looking at the legislation that's coming from the Heritage Area Coalition. That'll be coming up on a future agenda. And then I'm happy to say if I'd like to get concurrence on the appointments to the Natural Resources Committee, and there was a real hard press out there in the community to find applicants, and we got 3 people, and I wish we could just appoint them all. But they're talking about maybe doing an amendment to their bylaws to allow for an additional member. But we have 2 people that were recommended by the NRC that I would like to get your concurrence on appointing them to this committee. And then it'll be back up to full strength, which is great. So if you guys are okay with that, these were 2 very outstanding applicants. And like I said, there were 3. All of them were great. I wish we could appoint them all. But we'll get the other guy, we'll get him in there. And I know that we are trying to recruit for the professional position on the Historic Review Board. If any of you have any contacts, I've reached out to AIA and also to some people I know that just do historic resources. I've talked to some of our local architects. So we're looking. And Sabrina is off in Baltimore now. I saw the moving van take off. She flew, her husband was driving the van across country, so I hope they got there safely. Any other business? Okay, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.